Hola, Cardinals and Stars fans. Of course, I'm your long-winded host, David Castillo, and first thing I want to do is I want to thank the people that provide the feedback that they did. YouTube is not typically the place you kind of think of, especially YouTube comments, place you think of when it comes to insight and scholarship and things like that. And the feedback I got was really awesome. So if you did enjoy the first video, I'm doing this video because you enjoyed that, and because people seem to like it, and that's I appreciate that. Of course, also if you didn't like it, dude, leave a comment. Sort of challenge me to a duel, whatever, however you want to throw down. I'm cool. I can handle my verbal liquor, and I hope you can too, because I really want this particular. I do want to continue doing these things, and I want people to kind of feel welcome, to really kind of just be a part of what I hope is going to be just kind of an ongoing catalog of kind of all things analysis. Because listen, I don't say this to be like douchey and combative, condescending, like I know what the hell I'm talking about. I don't. I just try to put in the work, and that's it. Like there's nothing. I don't pretend to have answers or anything like that. But I do think there is kind of. I was kind of surprised by the feedback I got, because it definitely felt like, well, one of the things that I think people were kind of left wanting, especially following the season, was like a real breakdown, real analysis. You look at a team like Toronto, with kind of everything that happened, right? And of course, like if you're not a Leafs fan like myself, then the whole thing is like hilarious and fun to watch. And sort of and listen, like I'm not gonna pretend I'm above being like petty, and I don't like mind the Leafs. I respect and really appreciate what their philosophy is, especially Kyle Dubas, and I think they're doing some really great things. And I think they're doing things that shouldn't be scoffed at, and certainly like a Stars fan like myself shouldn't be laughing at. I mean, they made the playoffs, we didn't, so what is there to really celebrate? But at the same time, right? Like, look at a team like Toronto and kind of what happened there. And no matter where you go, you're going to find a real kind of, some real sort of deep reflection on like, man, what the hell happened? Like, how could things collapse so wrong? And of course, yeah, you have the subset of fans who just think it's all like, the sort of hockey version of Curse the Bambino. But of course, that's nonsense. You have real, like, really talented, good, serious writers that are, honestly considering like, man, do we trade Mitch Marner? Like, what do we do? Is Kyle Dubas wrong? Like, Sheldon Keefe, is he the problem? And so forth. And that's kind of the thing that we didn't get with Dallas this season. And there's a good reason for that. I'm not going to like retread kind of the things I've already discussed or anything like that. But I do think that there are a lot of things that we can break down about this season, and we didn't really get that, because I think for a lot of people, it's acceptable to just, re-rack, just can't, like what's done is done. It doesn't tell us anything about, how good Dallas is or how bad they are. They had the injuries, they had the schedule, the COVID, and so forth and so forth. And so that is completely valid. Like, I'm not here to sort of, pretend like it wasn't an issue or anything like that. Just that, listen, like, regardless of what happened, I think we can still talk about the things Dallas failed to do, and also kind of respect, the things that, while also respecting the things that happened beyond their control that sort of, helped cause those failures. And so that's why today I'm going to decide to focus on Denis Gurianov, which is, I'm not really sure. Like, I wrote, so I'll link to the articles in case you haven't read them. So I did some analysis on Heiskanen and Hintz, and really initially wanted to write about Gurianov, but then I was like, I'm just going to like repeat the same things I said in the last video. And the first thing that I think is interesting about Gurianov, is that I think for a lot of people, Gurianov represents the kind of the streaky goal scorer, which is silly. Like, the streaky scorer is a myth, right? It's one of those things where, if a guy scores 20 goals, chances are those goals are not going to be scored in perfect symmetry from, a goal game 1 and then a goal game 6. That's just not how it works, right? Chances are the goals are going to be clustered in very, potentially random patterns. And so I think, like, again, I don't think Gurianov is his issue is that he's a streaky scorer. Maybe that's part of it, whatever. I mean, the point, I think with Gurianov, it's more of he seems to be a streaky player without the right support. As in, Gurianov is a guy that can look like he's just look dangerous, and I don't think Gurianov ever looks truly confident, but I think to the extent that he has confidence, I think that's kind of displayed in just like quick decision making. He somehow, like, he's just kind of like, he finds himself in autopilot, and that really works to his advantage. So I think, and obviously that's a thing that we don't always get, right? And so to me, with Gurianov, I think what we got this season was more of his weaknesses, and his weaknesses are well established going back to the draft, which is that for Gurianov, like, listen, there's no, we know what he is, and we know what he offers, and what he doesn't. And what he doesn't offer is someone that's able to let the play develop in front of him, someone that's able to kind of slow down and not try to kitchen sink the ability to create chances, and maybe isn't like the best defensively. And so that's more or less what you get. He's a very one-dimensional forward, and that's not a bad thing. I honestly don't think it was funny because so much of the criticism surrounding Gurianov this season kind of centered around consistency, which is something he's never been good at. And it's not his strength. He's never going to be this complete forward or anything like that. But I think those players can be very valuable. Like, players that are not perfect, totally fine. Like, there are plenty of players in the NHL that are very, you might say, peculiar players, and that's okay. Like, I think one of the things that's always they've always criticized, especially Dallas, especially when it comes to development. The draft, not so much. The draft is kind of a weird thing. I'm not going to talk about the draft, but I think we can say things about development, which is that Dallas has kind of traditionally had this kind of struggle with kind of what to do when developing talent at the NHL level. And yes, I say develop talent. Why? Because development. And I'm trying real hard not to lose my shit on the sort of the common rejoinder and the cliche. The NHL is not a development league, and it's like, yes, it is. Like, you develop prospects to become NHL quality players. Those NHL players are then developed into NHL systems experts, and that development continues with the chemistry they have with other players, their usage, ice time, whether or not they start in the offensive versus defensive zone, how they adjust, and ultimately, right, the tactics and strategies used against specific opponents, especially in the postseason, right? So development is absolutely always happening, and it's just nonsense that anybody would just, especially that cocky personnel nonsense that people would think that, well, so listen, we don't develop at the NHL. That gets done everywhere else. Our only job was just to draft the guy and do some homework, and that's it. Watch some video. Like, no. And this isn't even semantics, right? This is, in what area of human life does development ever stop? If you go to college and get a job, is your boss going to tell you, oh, cool, okay, well, nice resume, you're hired? Yeah. You want to hang out in the break room? Talk to Bob, the janitor? And no disrespect to janitors. You guys are awesome. Guys and gals are awesome. Way underpaid. I love you guys. But that obviously doesn't happen, right? Because there is a mission statement. There's culture. There is this, the application of those skills and how they sort of develop into a career, right? So, again, this idea that development stops and that NHL has like no responsibility to try to kind of like helping players improve or leverage their strengths, continue. My God, I cannot speak right now. Continue to leverage their strengths is just abject nonsense. Like, don't take anyone seriously that ever trots out that line, because it's dumb, right? I mean, And the reason why I bring that up is precisely because the thing with Gurianov is the thing that Dallas is going to need to kind of give themselves a reset on, which is this concept of development. So with Gurianov, like, listen, this season was not Gurianov's best. I'm not here to offer some sort of clickbait analysis that, well, actually Gurianov was good. If you look at these histograms I provided, like, no, he was, we all saw it. Again, when, Gurianov is at his worst, he's inconsistent, he's indecisive, and he doesn't have enough raw tools outside of his shooting and skating to really compensate for some of that indecision and inconsistency. And so that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to make apologies for Gurianov, just that you have a player, you know his strengths and you know his weaknesses. So how can you turn him into a player that is playing less to his weaknesses and playing more to his strengths? And this season didn't really get that, right? So what I'm looking at right here is Evolving Hockey's goals above replacement, which I explained in the what you call it? Man, I've like just terrible memory all of a sudden. I explained in the Hintz article that I wrote for Defending Big D, and there, I think the best way to kind of think about goals above replacement, and again, I say this as somebody that does not in any way pretend to kind of understand, like truly understand the math behind it or anything like that. I think essentially what goals above replacement is meant to do, especially for forwards. Again, every model I think is going to have a certain kind of a certain bias, right? And that's okay. Like, you want models to have, bias. Like, people think of bias as like a dirty word, and it shouldn't be. Like, bias I think often tends to kind of signal sort of a kind of deep knowledge of something, no matter what it is, right? I'm biased. I'm biased towards Magic the Gathering. I'm biased because, man, I love the damn game, and it's hard for me to give up, even though it's really expensive, more expensive than drugs. Not that I would, know, speaking from experience, but nonetheless, like, it's kind of, this idea of a model being biased towards trying to prove a certain thing is, I think, okay to accept, as long as you know exactly where it's going. And so with the goals above replacement, this sort of, to me, what I get out of it when I look at kind of what it's built to do is really kind of trying to figure out within the season that sort of hyperspace between a player's talent and a player's production. Because obviously the twain don't always meet, right? And sometimes they do, or sometimes they blow well past that. And so with the example I gave in the Hintz article was Devon Shore, which is a name that some people might remember, especially since he actually saw some playing time in Edmonton. But Devon Shore was the 7th lead-in scorer for Dallas in that 2017-2018 season that we'd all rather forget under Hitchcock. And so here's the thing, right? Devon Shore was 7th in scoring. Does that make him the 7th best scorer on the team? The 7th most productive player on the team? No, of course not. There's a really important distinction, and I'm not gonna, like I said, I don't want to like say the exact same thing I was saying in the Hintz article, but you look at Devon Shore's goals above replacement, and you see a drastically different player. And so I think that's important. I think that's important because I think it's important to have a better language to kind of talk about players, a better language to articulate kind of what they can contribute. And if you go back to like Shore's goals above replacement, for example, like, well, he was just really quite bad. The only thing he kind of really provided above replacement level was, basically kind of, a little bit, higher, even strength defense. And I think he had some modest power play, ability as well. And so I bring all that to show that, well, Gurianov, like, yeah, sure, he wasn't himself. He certainly didn't score as many goals as we'd like, but, on the whole, wasn't too bad. His point total, well, I'm not saying it wasn't too bad. Like, it really was like a bad season for a player with the expectations he had. But the thing with Gurianov is that, as we can see here, and by the way these are broken down is blue kind of represents even strength offense, which also includes shot attempts. The sort of kind of purple, the sort of light purple represents power play offense. The green represents penalties taken, yellow penalties drawn, and then you have the kind of dark orange or burnt orange representing even strength defense, which makes sense. We think of Gurianov as a talent. We think of someone that really kind of offers, a little bit more offense than your average forward, and maybe not as much defense as you'd like. And so, anyways, the whole thing is here. What these numbers represent is that they're compared against the average rates of all these different elements and all these different pieces against a forward that is not a top 13 forward and a defenseman that is not a top 7 defenseman. And that's essentially how you end up with these numbers. And, they can kind of look kind of funny at times. But for the most part, that's kind of where you end up with. And I think that kind of represents, Gurianov pretty well. Now, if we look at the season before, right, when it seemed like, all systems were go, especially late in the season, right, we see a much different player, right? Fantastic even strength offense, still questionable defense, solid power play, penalties taken, yada, 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 right? And so this is something that, again, I think the whole thing that goes above replacement tries to capture is the kind of ripple effect a player has, especially offensively. I wouldn't necessarily use these to kind of like heavily judge a defenseman because, again, what it's trying to capture is sort of that border between talent and production, and specifically the ripple effect on production as a team on the whole. And Gurianov, like, he's a player that he's going to draw some penalties, and he's not going to take many, and he's going to produce offense, and that's a pretty damn good thing to have on your side, especially at his cap hit, right? So you had two drastically different seasons. I think there's a good reason why, right? If you look at this season, the only time like Gurianov really found stability was kind of late in the season when it was Dickinson with Ben, which is not a line that anybody wants to see moving forward, right? Like Dickinson especially. And, I want to like Dickinson. Like, I really want to like this kid because in a vacuum, has a decent shot, maybe. Decent speed. He's tough. For some bizarre reason, like a magnet for punishment, even when punishment isn't looking for him. But whatever. Like, that's good, right? But, man, he just does not make quality decisions with the puck. Like, offensively, as much as it pains me to say it, Derek Laxdal was right. Like this kid is he just doesn't. He's like Gurianov, just at a much like slower pace, but plus some kind of two-way ability. Where Dixon just does not have an offensive minded bone in his body, I should say. Just really not the kind of player that I think really. It's not the kind of player I want to see Gurianov play with. And of course, that was kind of much of what, sort of Gurianov was kind of stuck with when he struggled with Hintz and was kind of bounced around the lineup this past season. So I think there's a good reason and good explanation for why Gurianov struggled. And it's kind of the kind of thing that is easily preventable. Now, like I said, this is not to sort of make excuses and say like Gurianov belongs on like a top line or anything like that. Just that, given his strengths, right, the job here is then to figure out kind of, well, where can he be placed so that his strengths are always on display? And and failing that, where can he be put so that he's having to play less to his weaknesses? And, I hope that Dickinson and Ben, even though their underlying numbers are pretty good, hopefully they're not, like, stapled together for, like, extended periods, but, this is also something we saw with Jason Robertson, right? Like, listen, for all the discussions about quality of competition, quality, FCC line, well, of course they didn't produce. Look how tough their competition. Yeah, sure. Like, again, like that's granted, everybody faces, tough competition, some more than others, but not everyone like just fails to produce at an even replacement level. Like we saw with, guys like Como, and Faxa, especially this year, who was awful. But we have some more insight. It sounds like he was kind of playing with a busted wrist. But anyways, we saw this with Jason Robertson. Like Jason Robertson didn't like set the world ablaze as soon as he came in because, well, they had him on the line with like Tanner Kero and Justin Dowling. That was never going to do anything for his game. And so, obviously Robertson did more with his time with Hintz, for example. But I mean, that's again like Gurianov is still a young player. Like this is still a player figuring out how to sort of play with the puck. And I think that is kind of one of the things that I would say that I think Dallas needs to kind of really sort of help develop, the kind of thing that Dallas should focus on. I think there's a reason why Gurianov was so much more successful season before, which is that, well, he got a lot more time with Hintz, for example. More time with Hintz, especially when it was Hintz and Dickinson. Of course, he played with Pavelski as well, but the point is that I think a player like Hintz allowed Gurianov to sort of simultaneously speed up the game and slow the game down. I know it sounds kind of weird, but my point here is that Gurianov didn't have to think too much about the decision he would make with the puck because he had someone that was very quick, that could make plays quickly, and that could play to his speed when needed. And the other thing is that, well, Gurianov has played with Hintz before, played with him in the AHL. And so there's that comfort level. There's something to be said, especially for Gurianov, where he needs to be comfortable. And I think you want him, rather than trying to figure out how to be this two-way player, 5 tools dude and 200 feet, man. Like that's what we, no, like that's, yes, defense is important. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. What I'm saying is that in order for Gurianov to eventually get to a point where he's better defensively, I think it's important, and the onus is on Dallas to get him to be more comfortable and better offensively with the puck, knowing when to shoot, better awareness, and that'll take some time, and you have to, I think, just kind of live with that. I mean, especially because this is a guy that led the team in goals scored in 2019-22, even in goals scored 2019-2020. So you know what he's capable of. This is not like a situation where Nichushkin admitted, after the fact, like just didn't work hard, just mind wasn't in the right space, didn't have his head in the game, and then of course, also, Dallas had to contend with like the cap hit that Nichushkin carried. Even though in my perfect world, I think we still have Nichushkin, but listen, I'm not here to like bash Dallas for that particular decision because that's one of those things that tends to happen, right? With teams that are trying to contend, but anyways, like I say all that because I do think Gurianov is an important part of the future, and I think it's a part of the future that's relevant to a lot of the things that we tend to talk about now, especially when it comes to Bowness and his system, which is really trying to open up the game, and that's something that I think can be a challenge if Bowness is still the coach, not just next season, which he should be coach next season. I'm not here to like rag on like Bowness, even though like I'm sure like people think I hate the guy and can't stand him. It's not the case at all. Like I mean, a lot of the underlying numbers to this team are very, very good. Of course, there are also some underlying numbers that are very, very bad, which are much less talked about, but that's neither here nor there. And again, I've already discussed that, right? So I think my thing is this, which is that not only do you have a lot of players that need the game opened up for them and that I think are going to benefit by that, but also, this is also part of the pipeline. This is also part of the, sort of the group that's coming up. You look at the Maverick Bourque, who's a pure playmaker. Riley Damiani, maybe not as pure of a playmaker, but he's still a very functional playmaker, and looks to be like a kind of sort of passing forward. And then you have the sort of the puck mover, so a defenseman who's capable of passing in Thomas Harley. A lot of these players coming up are going to need a system that allows them to play their strengths, and so this is not about like just adopting this kind of Toronto mentality and like all offense. I think the Toronto thing is kind of its own issue, and I don't want to talk about the Maple Leafs like in a video that I'm trying to discuss Gurianov, but for all the flack that Toronto's given for what they did this season and like why they failed and why it was such an epic collapse, which it was, and it was kind of hilarious from a non-Leafs perspective. But for all the flack that they're given, I think their problem was that they tried to veer too far from who they were. Bringing in guys like Simmons and Thornton and Foligno and so forth, like Bogosian, like that. I mean, I think some of those signings were okay, but bringing in a dude because he has leadership and grit and yada yada, like that only goes so far. And that's one of the things that Robert Tiffin talked about in his article in 2019, which excellent piece. I'll link to it in the article in the description below. But basically the whole concept was something you see with a lot of teams, which is that Jim Nill, I think they started to struggle when they instead of kind of building towards a consistent contender, the pieces that it would take to do that, they started to kind of find the missing pieces for a traditional Stanley Cup favorite. And that's why we've had just veteran stopgap after veteran stopgap when it wasn't really needed. And so that I think is going to be like the key moving forward, and especially the key for players like Denis Gurianov, where if you want to get the most out of them, well, first and foremost, you have to know what your identity is moving forward. And that's what I think is more critical than anything going into the offseason, which is not like, well, who can we sign, but who are we? If you can answer that question, if you can tell yourselves exactly who you are and where you're headed and who you want to be, it's going to make things a lot easier. You're going to know exactly, you're going to have the language to talk about exactly what you're looking for. And so it's kind of one of those things I'd like to see with Dallas. Like I really, the team is going to be pretty darn good next season. And chances are someone like Gurianov is probably going to be outside of the top six. Robinson, Hintz, Pavelski, Benn, Seguin, Radulov, even though the Benn sort of experiment at center has already been tried. Honestly, I don't expect it to last that long. But at the same time, if that's what it takes to kind of get him going, I'm like cool with that. But the point is that, chances are you have a top six that's kind of centered around that. And that leaves Gurianov to play, perhaps a potentially check-in line role with, say, like Kiviranta and Faxa or Dickinson or whatever the case may be. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I know people are gonna like laugh, like, no, what are you talking about? Gurianov in like the Como role? Like, we need to re-sign one of those guys or bring in someone else that. Listen, if your top six is Robinson, Hintz, Pavelski, and Benn, Seguin, Radulov, you're not gonna have a third line trying to compete with those top 6 minutes the way Bonus did this season with Como and Faxa. Actually, I can't remember if Faxa was outside of the top 6, but I know Dickinson was the fourth leading forward in even strength ice time, which I have no idea how that happened. Like, it's just some of the things, man. But that's again, like I said, this is not coming from a place of like, I hate everything they do and screw Dallas. It's more of like, this team really has potential to be an excellent team. But it's going to take some real like serious analysis and acceptance of players that maybe aren't always complete. And so I think Gurianov is just, I think he's going to be fine. I think this is a player that we saw what he can do 2 seasons ago. And what he did this season was pretty forgettable, but at the same time, we know why it happened. And, there's no need to sort of trample on a performance. And, I fully expect Gurianov to kind of do the kind of thing that sort of Nichushkin did when he went to Colorado, and which is, sort of bounce back from a forgettable season because, some of his talents are just undeniable. And that's pretty much it. I'm not even sure I talked about Denis Gurianov as much as I wanted to, but hopefully that was enough. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. And if there is this particular topic or something you want me to cover, please let me know. Like I'm here all week. I finally have kind of time to kind of sort of pump out content if that's the kind of thing that you want to see. So if there's a topic you'd like to see me cover, analysis that I haven't done, or just kind of want to leave like a or you just want to like troll my account, that's fine too. But just be clever about it because this is early going for me, and I want to try to make this a regular thing. And I just want to have like a a better discussion with you guys. That's pretty much it, man. So really appreciate you guys, and thank you for listening, and do all the things that you're supposed to do with social media when you like something. Adios.